Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, it takes a village of volatility, or so it seems. Stocks tumble yet again. President Trump holds a cabinet meeting today as tariff reality that it can be discerned sets in. Stock market slides, all three major indices closing in the red, even as the White House says dozens of countries are apparently coming to the table to talk tariffs. And yet, trade tensions with China, they're only increasing. President Trump's reciprocal tariffs on the world's second largest economy now total 145%, though there are some exemptions. Beijing's retaliatory tariffs are also now in effect to the tune of about 84%. Today, President Trump acknowledged there will be what he calls transition problems.
We're in very good shape. We think we're doing very well. Again, there'll be a transition cost and transition problems, but in the end, it's going to be a beautiful thing.
I want to start tonight with Willie James Inman at the White House. Kelly O'Grady, my good friend in New York. Kelly, let me start with you because we've been doing this for so many days. And the volatility today was kind of remarkable, almost as remarkable as yesterday's were in the upward direction. At the one point today, the Dow was down, if I remember correctly, 2,100 points, closed about 1,000 points down. That seems to be a market still trying to wrestle with what all of this means.
That's right, Major. And I think you're going to see that market and the investors wrestle with this for a while. I will give you another stat to just put into context how volatile it was. At one point, the S&P 500 was down just about 6%. And that's important because when you hit 7%, it's called a circuit breaker, and trading across the indexes are halted for 15 minutes. So we got really close to that today. But what you're seeing, yesterday was a bit of a sugar high. I talked to a bunch of investors, and every single one of them told me they did not think that we had seen the bottom in the market, that there's still so much back and forth, and that today people were coming to terms, I think you said it right off the top, with the tariff reality, that we still have a 10% tariff on most nations. That's not nothing. And this trade war that seems to be developing with China is giving a lot of investors anxiety. What we saw happen with the bond market and the 10-year Treasury, also a lot of anxiety as investors just wonder, is the dollar going to remain strong? Is the economy going to remain strong?
Kelly, stand by. I want to talk to Willie on the North Lawn of the White House. What is the White House saying today about the future of these tariff talks?
Hey there, Major. Well, the president was asked about this earlier today. What happens in 90 days? And he essentially said that those tariffs would go back into place if the United States doesn't get what it wants in terms of those negotiations with their trading partners and nations around the world. Of course, let's remember that those retaliatory tariffs, some 125%, you add the 20% fentanyl tariffs, that brings it to 145% for those some of those goods coming from China. But the White House saying that they're negotiating here. Peter Navarro, the White House trade advisor, essentially says that this 90-day time period buys time for the U.S., including President Trump, to negotiate. And advisors indicated earlier today that Trump would be personally involved with those negotiations, especially when it comes to China.
Kelly, there's a conversation going on here in Washington. Some of it has a political aspect to it, but there is some of it that's going on in Wall Street that's just looking at the timeline of yesterday. Because the president's announcement was preceded, about the pause, was preceded by a very sharp increase in stock buying. Walk us through what the timeline suggests or tells us.
Right. So the timeline is really all about a question of when President Trump put out this post that essentially said, I believe it was 9:37 exactly, it's a good time to buy. It's a good time to get in. And then a couple of hours later, not even 4, in the 1 o'clock hour was when he announced this 90-day pause. And so the accusation is that this may have been what we call market manipulation. So trying to get investors to respond in a specific way. Oftentimes you see it with a particular stock. Elon Musk has been accused of this in the past with Tesla. I will say I've talked to a few investors and analysts and folks at the SEC about this, or that were formerly at the SEC. They say he's been saying that the markets are okay for a while, even over the past week and a half, that it wasn't necessarily a change in tone, but a lot of people are suggesting it was, Major.
Willie, I want to play for you some sound from the top economic advisor of the White House, Kevin Hassett. Let's play that.
I don't think that I ever give stock advice about now, but I think every day is a good day to buy if you believe in the future of America, and every day is a good day to hold.
So, Willie, that's sort of a redirection of the question, not really going to the substance, which is, did anyone in the White House know this was going to happen? And did any of that information leak out in ways that could influence the way people purchased or made decisions on the stock market?
Yeah, that's the question here, Major. But the White House is trying to explain away this situation. Not only that sound you played there coming from the president's top economic advisor, but also a spokesperson gave us a statement, and he reiterated that the president is looking to reassure Americans in the economy. I want to read part of that statement for our viewers. He says, "It is the responsibility of the president of the United States to reassure the markets and Americans about their economic security in the face of nonstop media fear-mongering." And then that statement goes on to criticize Democrats. So the White House looking to not necessarily address the situation, but also sidestep it in a way that really doesn't explain what the president potentially did there or the situation itself, Major.
Kelly, that phrase has come up a lot in the last 24 hours from the White House, media fear-mongering. So let's take you out of it. Let's take me out of it. What has happened on the indices year to date? They're all down. And they're down because it seems to me those who are making market decisions are on the net down, or at least buying the down and not buying the up.
Well, and it's interesting, actually. I'm glad that you put that into context of what's happened year to date, because let's just take the last week out of it. Prior to that, you look at the indices around the world that we track in Asia and Europe, and those markets were actually doing much better than the U.S. And I will highlight that there are a number of major banks, which, by the way, we're going to start to see reporting tomorrow. That's going to be an important moment for the market, that have talked about a slowdown in economic growth. So taking you and me out of it, you know, it's not just the fear-mongering. It is that we are hearing this from some of these major business leaders as well, that they're concerned.
And Kelly, again, taking you out of it, taking me out of it, there was very positive inflation news today that under normal circumstances, outside of this tariff conversation and the anxiety therein, probably would have sent the market in a more positive direction.
I am so glad you brought that up, Major, because I saw this morning and I was like, wow, we're going to have a great day in the markets. You're right. Normally, the fact that we saw 2.8% the month before inflation went down to 2.4%, you would have seen investors celebrate, but they're not looking backwards, they're looking forwards. And what if and what might happen with tariffs?
Kelly O'Grady in New York. My thanks to you. Willie James Inman at the White House. Thanks to you also.